What's up, my babies? Stefi Cohen here. We are in Miami at Hybrid Performance Method with the muscle duck himself, Dr. Jordan Shallow. Today we're going to be discussing something that seems like a very common complaint during low back squatting, and that's pain on your elbow and on your bicep. So we're going to be talking about it, giving you a little bit of background information, and then walking you through 3 different exercises that you can incorporate to decrease the likelihood of having elbow and bicep pain during the low back squat. I never really started having bicep pain until I started squatting heavier and heavier. Like it seems like something that happens as you increase the load in your low bar squat.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a cumulative effect with the bench press as well, right? Like, powerlifting is squat, bench, and dead. And I know just as many people who can't squat because of their elbows that can't bench because of their elbows, or can't squat because of their knees and hips. So it's just, I think it's a cumulative stress of just getting stronger, and like, the worse the range of motion becomes, whether that's at the shoulder or the thoracic spine, the more that's just going to manifest itself across all 3 lifts, but especially in the squat and especially in the bench press.
What do people usually do to fix it, really?
Well,
I see most of them getting stuck just doing like doorway stretches or overly fixating on just stretching their tight pecs. But in reality, it's multifactorial, and there's more than one thing that you should be considering to do other than that.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is focusing on the site of pain. Like, the pain at the elbow is a light on the dashboard, right? It just says check engine. You don't change the bulb on the dashboard, you actually run the code and check the engine. So the reason it becomes multifactorial is a lot of times it stems from the shoulder, and the shoulder itself is multifactorial. So what we'll go over how to increase range of motion of the thoracic spine, how to inhibit lats specifically, but as a general rule, basically anything that internally rotates the shoulder. And then we'll look to activate kind of into full flexion, activate the lower traps. And that way that puts our shoulder in a better position where we're not then taxing the elbow so much when we have a bar on our back. Yeah, so I mean, the problem stems from freedom of movement at the shoulder exists in all 3 planes, right? Flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, internal, external rotation, where if you're missing degrees in any one of those ranges of motion, the demand doesn't go away, it just goes elsewhere. And now if we think of the elbow in its simplest form just works as a hinge, right? Like just through one single plane of flexion extension. Now, if we're missing range of motion at the shoulder, all of a sudden that range of motion demand now comes at the elbow. So a joint that should just be doing this, moving through one plane, now has a demand through multiple planes. That's why elbow pain can be fairly variant from like one person to the next, because some people get it in the bicep, some people will get it like in the tricep or the back of the elbow, or just like kind of diffuse. It's usually just a manifestation of where in the shoulder they're deficient in what range of motion, right? So again, just that's the light on the dashboard. When we check the engine, we find that there's usually a deficiency in range of motion at the level of the shoulder, and then you kind of subdivide the shoulder into its components of thoracic spine, scapular position, and then balancing internal, external rotation.
And that's something that you see across different joints as well.
Yeah, it's the same phenomenon with the hip, right? Like freedom of movement, ball and socket joint at the hip then goes into the hinge joint at the knee. People who have knee pain, again, just with the stability of the knee being mostly from structure, from a functional standpoint, where we're looking to address it like more conservatively, look to improve function at the hip, knee pain goes away.
I feel like a lot of the advice that you see across social media from fitness rehab experts is, especially when it comes to like elbow pain, elbow tendinitis, tennis elbow, golf first elbow, or however they want to call it, they usually focus on like, I don't know, isometrics, eccentrics, whatever, to like heal the tendon. But I think you were spot on when you said, or when you're talking about it from a deficit range of motion coming from another joint leading to pain in the elbow joint. I think that's spot on.
Well, I mean, there's 168 hours in a week, right? And if someone comes in with tennis elbow from squatting, it's like, of 168 hours, how many minutes are you in that position? It's not overuse, it's misuse, right? Like, the powerlifters I deal with don't exactly, they're not hitting 400-yard drives. So where's this overuse coming from, right? So the idea of like, you can increase the ability for a tendon to resist force, but you're better off decreasing the amount of load that tendon has to bear in the first place, right? Like changing that path of least resistance, that the force isn't going into such a small tendon, that's something that's not hugely weight bearing in the hundreds of pounds. so that force just moves freely through that joint as a consequence of getting the shoulder to move properly, rather than worrying about like isometrics or eccentrics and all these kind of passive like loading parameters in a means of like fixing tendonitis or tendinosis or whatever. It's like looking at why that force is actually being applied there, and not worrying so much about increasing like the tensile strength of the tendon in that position. Just don't apply as much force to the tendon and it'll be fine.
When do you think would be a good time to implement those specific exercises, like tendon healing exercises for the elbow, if so?
I mean, I think if we spent more of our time like planning for it not to happen, I don't really know, like from a bang from a buck perspective, we'd be better off worrying about preventing the applied load from happening rather than worrying about the tissue tolerance, because that's kind of what an injury is, right? Applied load greater than tissue tolerance. So we spend a lot of time on tissue tolerance with isometrics and eccentrics and all these things founded in research. But if we take a step back and we just think, okay, maybe if we found a way to reduce the applied load, we wouldn't have to spend all this time in tissue tolerance, right? So I think the answer likely exists somewhere between, like with the current narrative in rehabilitation and prehab and mobility and all that stuff. I think it's too narrow-minded. Like it's not really applicable to like real strength athletes. Like I don't think wall sits, although they can down-regulate pain, I don't really know if they're going to outrun a 500-pound squat, right? Like if you're in a bad position, that applied force is going where it should. You can work on tissue tolerance all you want, but it's water against the bank, right? You're just going to erode it away eventually. It's like we worry about straightening the course and then having that path of least resistance being more intuitive with the way our body should work. Then we'll never have to, or we should spend very little time having to allocate at the level of tissue tolerance.
Have you ever struggled with elbow pain, bicep pain in lower squat?
Not with squatting, no.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the common thing you'll see is the grip, right? You can notice when I squat for being like a 125 kilo lifter, my hands are in a very close position, and most people start that way, right? And most people don't start at 125 kilos, and as they get bigger and stronger, they just slowly start to widen their grip out until their hands are at the end of the plate. And all that is just they're accommodating for their lack of range of motion of the shoulder. So if you can kind of keep a system of checks and balances where it's like, here's where my hands are. Unless my shoulders get 14 inches wider, this is where they're going to stay. And it's not about avoiding provocation and moving my hands out. It's about understanding that, okay, in this position, if my elbow starts to hurt, if this is fixed, this moves through one plane, I'm missing something here. So addressing this and then working downstream from the shoulder rather than just going out, out, out. Because once you start having elbow pain out here, you got a big problem to unpack. That's a lot of deficiency of range of motion that you've just been running away from throughout your lifting career that is now going to take that much more time to unwind. Yeah, so first exercise we're going to do, first drill is to increase thoracic extension. So it's a child's pose with a PVC. So what you're going to do, get a bench, kind of get down on all fours, put the elbows up on the bench, try and drop your head between your shoulders, making sure you're putting your upper back into extension and not your lower back. So you don't want like a huge arch through the lower back. And as you kind of sit into the stretch, you want to kind of think of dropping your sternum or your chest down to the floor as you bring your head beneath the plane of the bench. Really just trying to drive that upper back into extension, getting it out of that forward flex posture we find ourselves in all day. The second one, we're going to be an overhead PNF. So we're going to use a band anchored to a rig or a rack, kind of loop your hand through, get it secured at the back of the elbow. And then you're kind of going to get it in a split lunge position. So the opposite foot forward to the shoulder that we're going to be working on. And then as we lunge into the stretch, we're going to let that band pull our elbow high, keeping our rib cage tucked down. Again, we're not trying to get the low back into extension. And then as we let that band pull our shoulder into full flexion, we're going to find an end range, hold, and then drive our elbow down into the band. So activating against the resistance of the band into shoulder extension, hold that for about 6 seconds. Then as you relax into that, you're going to lunge deeper into that front leg and allow that shoulder to go a little bit higher up. Then lastly, we're going to get into an overhead squat with a band. So again, set a band up at a rack or a rig about shoulder height. We're going to pull that band kind of in like a Y position overhead, and we're going to hold that as we lower ourselves into a squat. And then we're gonna just do repetitions with our arms overhead against the resistance of the band, activating the lower traps, working on keeping our chest up. And then from there, we're gonna go right onto the barbell and start to integrate these 3 into our warm-up sets as we start to load plates on the bar. And so those are my kind of 3 simple go-to drills to kind of clear up or prevent elbow pain when low bar squatting. Again, just kind of specific to what I find works, but the general principle behind it's fairly sound. So if you're experiencing elbow pain, these 3 drills aren't working for you, just think of that, if it's gonna start from the level of the shoulder's more than just that ball and socket, right? Like there's the position of the scapula, the position of the thoracic spine. So having an intervention at each level, have something that increases either thoracic rotation, thoracic extension, have something that addresses the position of the shoulder blade, and then have something that addresses the movement of the glenohumeral joint, so flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, internal, external rotation. So kind of looking a little bit more global at how the shoulder works on the whole, rather than just getting fixated on whether it's the ball and socket, the scapula, or the thoracic spine. We can look to derive a benefit from improving range of motion at all 3 that's gonna end up accumulating to less pain and less stress at the elbow when we're low bar squatting.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Ah! Okay.
You're just too big of a meathead, that's why. American Airlines Flight 74, non-stop to Chicago. Caesar. I'm gonna go do this on the railway tracks.
I know.